Board of Directors. Fully touches more.
All right.
Did not get it.
We'll go ahead and get started if everyone's ready.
That's probably part of it. Yeah.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We'll go ahead and start off with some introductions. Corinne Heiner, Deschutes County Natural Resources and Project Wildfire Director.
Lauren Street, Deschutes County Natural Resources Specialist.
Robin Church, volunteer.
Deschutes County Planning.
Eddie Johnson, unofficial representative of Westbrook Meadows, Firewise community.
Ben Duda, Deschutes County Sheriff's Office, County Emergency Manager.
Melissa Steele, Deputy Fire Marshal, Ben Fire.
Gary Marshall, Deschutes County Fire District 2. Chris Perry, Deschutes 911.
Monty Damarel, Newberry Regional Partnership.
Luke D, Witchy Creek HOA. Greg Brown, Ventura Woods.
Morning, David Mormon with American Red Cross.
Paul Cantino, Forest Fuels Project Planner, COIC.
Tony DeVille, Deschutes County Commissioner.
Yeah.
Robbie Flowers, I am U.S. Forest Service here in Bend.
Thanks for being here, everyone. If you're joining us online, if you could please do your introduction in the chat, that would be really helpful for me for our meeting notes. And so just a couple of announcements from myself and Lauren. Fire Free is coming up. The first and 2nd of May, Sun River is going to be holding their 2 days for Fire Free at the Sun River compost site. And the Bend Not Fill starts May 15th and goes through the 24th. We're open 7 days a week, 7 a.m. to 4:30. And then the 3 transfer stations, Southwest in Lapine, Negus in Redmond, and the Northwest and Sisters, those dates are going to be June 5th through the 13th. Lapine and Redmond are open Monday through Saturday, and then Sisters is open Wednesday through Saturday. The other announcement I have, been letting everybody know, we did get the Oregon Emergency Management FEMA grant. We're going to go ahead and start working on combining the 7 CWPPs into one. That is likely going to start the beginning of July after the new fiscal year. So if you're interested in joining those meetings and being a stakeholder or just a community member that wants to sit in and provide any details and work on the action plans with us, go ahead and let me know and I'll get you on that email list. And then I'll give it over to Lauren.
Yeah, good morning. Just a couple of quick department updates. We were able to fund 32 communities through our Spring Sweat Equity Bend rental program this year. We saw a record number of applications for that this year. There were 45 applications in 2025 and there were close to 70 this year. So we're continuing to see that program, at least the reach, expand further and further every year. So we're excited to get those bins out for folks starting May 1st through the end of June. For the Community Wildfire Defense Grant, we're still in the planning phases of that. And for folks that might not know, that's the $3.4 million that's going to be allocated to the greater Lapine area to do wildfire mitigation, education, outreach, all sorts of stuff. And last week we were able to receive our air curtain burner specifically for that project. So we're excited about that. It is parked over at the road department. We also are funded for the BLM Good Neighbor Authority funding source, and we received $275,000 from them to do larger community projects. That's both forest restoration and fuels mitigation projects. Those are going to be, like I said, larger community projects funded at about $25,000 each. We're going to be able to fund 3 of those per year for 3 years, so 9 projects total. And then about 2 weeks ago, we got our updated Deschutes County Firewise numbers. We have 101 active Firewise communities, which is incredible. And then that's just the active status. If we look at all statuses, so that includes pending and also inactive Firewise communities, we have 124, and a majority of that number, they're pending applications. I think like 16 or 17 of those are pending applications. So that's incredible work. And that has to do with all the folks that are sitting in this room. So I just want to say thank you for the work that you're doing. And I think that is it for me for now.
Thank you. So this morning, we have Dr. Robbie Flowers joining us from the U.S. Forest Service. He's the regional entomologist for Region 6. And he's going to talk to us about some insects in the area and how that relates to fire. When you're ready.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah. No, it's great to be with you today. I wanted to share a little bit about what goes on in my world. I've been, working here for like 20 years now. So it's been about 9 years with the state, working over on the west side, and was a state forest entomologist there. Worked with some folks in this room back then. And then I've been here attached to the Deschutes. My job is technically with the regional office over in Portland, but I'm kind of remote here and been for the last 9-10 years. And so yeah, I just wanted to, let me see if I can get the share going here. So as I tell my students, I work some at the college too, and it's like, when you get a chance, try to tell an interesting story. So whenever you do a presentation, I feel like that's kind of, the least worst thing you can do. So let's see if we're able to share. Okay, how's that coming through for everybody? It's good. All right. And if you have questions as we go along, if you want to drop those in the chat, maybe I don't know if I'll be able to monitor that as well as I can. But yeah, so really the kind of things that I work on, I describe myself as a disturbance ecologist. And so it's basically things that are going to disrupt, either forest systems, urban and community forest systems, those kinds of things. But I had to give a shout to my dad, who is a huge spaghetti Western fan. So I watched all these movies growing up, and I'm kind of dating myself with that reference. But I think we're going to talk a little bit about, mostly the questions I get are, is this something I need to worry about, or is this something that I don't need to worry about? And so I think in that realm, we can kind of give you a bit of an intro to this topic. And then I will draw in the fire piece of this, which is usually a whole series of lectures that I give about this. We'll distill that into like about 5 minutes. So that should be good. But we'll jump in with just kind of this primer on forest insects. So if you spend any time outside, you just are constantly running into these things. And so I get lots of questions and lots of very bad pictures, of like, what is this? Just some blurred image or something that's kind of squished. Or I get random things just dropped off at my office that, to identify. But for the most part, most of the forest insects you're going to observe out there are good actors. They're working in ways that are beneficial to us. What I would call the bad are where we have these eruptive outbreaks. And this generally tends to fall on the categories of the bark beetles and the defoliators. I spend most of my time working with bark beetles. And so usually that's the one thing people have heard of when I tell them what I do. They're like, oh yeah, mountain pine beetle. So that's probably the one that you might have heard of. And then what I'm calling kind of the ugly here is just our ever expanding array of non-native invasive insect pests. And there's as many diseases that go along in that category too, but I'm just going to kind of focus mostly on the insects today because let's be frank, they're more interesting. Just kidding, right? Pathologist friends will get mad at me for saying that. But so for the most part, most of what you're going to observe out there, most of the forest insects we see are not tree killers. They're coming in kind of after disturbance of some sort. And they're really kind of kickstarting this nutrient decomposition process. And some of the more, kind of colorful ones that we see out there, there's two major categories of these wood-boring insects. The cerambycids, which are kind of these round-headed borers, and kind of see the array of those. If you've ever, when you split wood, you'll find these. If you're, doing anything with dead and down stuff, you will usually find these. The other big category is the buprestids, the flat-headed wood borers, and Some of these also very colorful insects, but for the most part, they're kickstarting this kind of turnover, this recycling process. And they do that by their actual boring activity in the wood, and they're also introducing fungi that are breaking those things down. And so in this way, they're just part of our, kind of turnover system for, in both forest and in other settings. They're also connected to fire. So especially once the trees are kind of cool enough to the touch, the wood borers are in there immediately. And so this is just a shot showing basically this fire that happened here in Central Oregon. And this was many years ago in August. So, kind of standing dead trees. And then very soon after that, you can see kind of the effects of the wood borers, kind of all this activity. They actually have they have a sensory system, this organ that detects heat, and it's attached to the flight muscles. And so they have no control over, basically they orient towards, standing like, sort of dark things that are vertically upright and that are warm. And so I get a lot of questions from firefighters too. So we have these, basically they if you're warm and you kind of smell like smoke, you're going to be attractive as well. So I get these questions about fire beetles. They're like, what's with the fire beetles? And they do occasionally, they'll bite a little bit too.
These ones that bite you.
Yeah. So yeah, they're kind of sampling to see if you're like a good tree or not. It's kind of the way they test whether you're a good tree. So you might get a little bite here and there. But for the most part, they're harmless, I would say. Just annoying. We have another big group of insects, which you may see these kind of flying around. They kind of look like wasps, but they are parasitic. They're basically parasites of other insects. And so they really help in terms of regulating some of the populations. And so most of what we consider kind of the bad actors exist on this continuum of like small populations that are just normal kind of part of the system, all the way up to these outbreaks in areas where they're kind of killing vast sections of forest. And so a lot of these you can see here, this is kind of a caterpillar that's been, I guess I can't really see. Caterpillar's been parasitized by one of these insects. You also see these, they actually have the ability to like sense these wood borer larvae underneath the bark there. And they can actually, they have this ovipositor right here that they can drill down and actually like lay eggs in these insects underneath the bark. So kind of some pretty fascinating biology with some of these, but definitely kind of in the realm of science fiction, I feel like, when we're talking about these things. The other big group that you'll see in your garden and your, when you're out in the woods are predators. And so these are also kind of regulators of insect populations, and they can go from anything from like yellow jacket to ladybugs. There's kind of this whole array of insects that again, they're kind of helping to regulate these populations. This insect here, the clarids, you'll see these a lot on trees where you're dealing with bark beetle issues. So they're pretty big predators of bark beetles. But again, with the predators and parasites, it's kind of a numbers game. So they can only do so much regulatory activity, mostly at smaller population levels. Once you expand into these outbreaks, it's really hard for them to keep up. And then I'll just mention the pollinators too. So this is something that, coming up, I was always kind of dealing with, kind of tree killing insects and other things. Here lately in the last, several years, I've been pulled more into kind of pollinator activities and those kinds of things. So you think about the bees and moths, but there's also lots of other important groups. There's a lot of beetles. A lot of the wood boring beetles actually are pollinators as well. So I've been working a lot in this space relative with Oregon State and others, relative to some pesticide issues and other things like that. But there's also this Oregon Bee Project. I wanted to give a shout out to that as well. So this is really something we've been working on, a lot of citizen science and research going into this, just looking at overall, we think of just honeybees when we think of bees, but there's a whole suite of native bees and other pollinators that we're kind of paying attention to with this project. And one of my good friends and one of Corinne's friends as well, Christine, she took one for the team on this one. So when you're doing bee surveys, it gets gnarly sometimes. So yeah, thanks Christine for your dedication. All right, so moving on to kind of the bad insects, and this is where I typically spend most of my time. So this is a shot from a friend sent me from Black Hills, South Dakota, and so they had a very large outbreak of bark beetles there. And so when the outbreak finally kind of collapsed. They had this huge celebration with the fireworks and the burning of the bark beetle. I do like that it has, like these kind of gnarly teeth and the green eyes with it was like shooting, fireworks out of the antennae. So it definitely engenders a lot of passion whenever these things move in and start, killing this vast swath of trees. What he didn't have the heart to tell them is like, well, it's going to be back. Like this is a cycle that's going to come back around. But I'm sure it felt good to do that. We also have some artist renderings. This is a friend of mine from the Department of Agriculture submitted this. Like I always like to show this. It's kind of the feeling you get when the bark beetles come to town. But for the most part, most of the major tree species we have here in Central Oregon have a one particular bark beetle associated with them that tends to be a tree killer. There's also 400 or 500 other species that kind of act in the way that the wood borers do, just kind of as secondary pests. They kind of come in towards the end of these trees kind of fading, and then kind of again start that decomposition and recycling process. But we've had some pretty spectacular outbreaks here, and we have some that are building as well. And so I did want to mention a few of these bark beetles. I'll talk a bit today mostly about mountain pine beetle. It's the major one that we see in lodgepole and ponderosa pine to some degree. Western pine beetle and ips are the ones we see typically around Central Oregon in ponderosa pine. And then there's some associated with Doug fir and also grand fir and white fir. So mention a bit about those. And then just some of the defoliators. I think if you may not have observed these as much, Pandora moth is probably the one that we're most familiar with here in Central Oregon. So I did want to mention that one. It's just a kind of an interesting critter. This map shows it's a bit dated at this point, but it shows that like the footprint of some of these major outbreaks that we've had. And this goes back to the mid 80s. We had a period in the mid 80s where we really had a significant amount of, this was basically through these aerial surveys that we do, we were detecting this damage. And so this yellow footprint is basically all of Western spruce budworm. That was close to about 6 million acres of that outbreak. Is anyone here in the late 1980s to see that? Yeah, probably. Remember some of that over on Santiam Pass. There was quite a bit of damage all through the Blue Mountains and through the Ochco, up along the Cascade Crest. It actually extended all the way over onto the west side as well. So largest outbreak we've had of anything, and at least in our sort of documented Oregon history. Subsequent to that, so these trees, I'll talk a bit about the defoliators. They strip the needles off, they kind of impact the health. And then subsequent to that, we had bark beetle outbreaks. And this is mostly the tree species affected by spruce budworm. We don't have a lot of spruce. We have some Engelmann spruce out there, but mostly it was grand fir, white fir, and Douglas fir that were defoliated. And so the bark beetles associated with those came in after. You can see kind of in the kind of aqua color, and what's the other one? In the orange. So we had these kind of big bark beetle outbreaks subsequent to that. If we kind of zoom in on our area, so kind of Deschutes County and south and Klamath and Lake counties, you can see in the green there was when we had the big 1980s mountain pine beetle outbreak. And so probably remember that one too. It was like all through the Cascades. It was mostly lodgepole pine and some ponderosa pine. And then subsequent to that, the one that I was here for in the purple kind of showing. And so as these forests were significantly impacted when mountain pine beetle came back around, there really wasn't anything there for them. They don't go into younger trees. And so it's mostly they're focused on these older stands. And so we had kind of these outbreaks to the north and along Cascade Crest. And then it was really centered down on the Fremont-Wainema National Forest. And so we had what was called the red zone down there, where we just had these massive areas of dead trees. And so the kind of quick primer on bark beetles and why they are so effective and why they're able to do what they do. I like to describe them as opportunistic. So they're taking advantage of basically a system under stress. They also have this kind of cool system of being able to communicate via pheromones. And so they are able to, instead of everyone kind of going their own way, they actually orient specifically to certain trees, zoom in on those, mass attack those is the way we describe it. So there's this massive input of beetles, kills that tree, then they follow the signals to the next tree. And so in this way, they can kind of overcome the tree defenses. As far as their activity, they kind of have this 1-2 punch. And so these adults bore into the tree, lay eggs within those, and then as the larvae feed and work, they're in this phloem layer. So it's the nutrient conducting tissues kind of get stripped away. they also have these specialized structures where they're introducing fungi into the trees too and plugging up the water conducting tissues. And so you have sort of the nutrients get shut down and then the water conducting tissues get plugged up. And so very quickly you see trees fade. And if you're just even around town where you would see, a tree, the crown quickly goes off color. If it's a conifer, it's probably some bark beetles related to that. Lots of other things too, but that's kind of the main thing. Some of the signs and symptoms you would see. On the exterior of the tree, on the bark, you'd see these pitch tubes. That's kind of the way we identify these things. Or if it's on down material where there's the resin canals are basically non-functional, then you see boring dust. You probably heard blue stain wood or blue stain products. So if you would cut these trees in half, kind of look at these ray cells, you would see all of the blue stain in those. And then if you peel back the bark, this is what makes insect life easier than trying to do disease diagnostics. We can actually identify the particular species just based on these gallery patterns. And so very quickly allows us to be able to identify what is killing that particular tree. As far as the links to outbreaks, so we kind of have two scenarios here, kind of a west side scenario and more of what we see in Central Oregon. So on the west side, a lot of things are connected to down materials, and usually with Doug fir beetle. And so when we have these large blowdown events at the coast, it creates this large amount of down material that can get infested by Doug fir beetle, and then they build up populations in those and kind of move out and kill other trees from there. Usually it doesn't spread across the landscape. It's more of just isolated pockets of damage. There's also a ton of root disease on the west side. And so areas that have a lot of root disease tend to have a lot of bark beetles as well. So especially with state and private lands there, they're always dealing with the effects of root diseases plus these outbreaks of Doug fir beetle. Moving over to Central Oregon, it's really more weather related, and climate change, if you believe in that sort of thing, is also an effect in terms of both the drought cycles and the temperatures. And temperature is becoming much more of a player than we ever sort of realized before. But these hotter, drier temperatures really kind of driving some of these outbreaks that we see. But in this case, this is mountain pine beetle and it operates very much like a fire. You can see it kind of sweeping across the landscape there. And for the most part, these are driven by stand conditions. And so they tend to like these larger, older stands, particularly lodgepole pine is kind of the key species in those. And you may never observe these. A lot of these occur in, up in wilderness areas and other places outside of, kind of our purview. We don't really see them driving down the highway, but these have been some fairly large events. And there's a strong connection, of course, with fire once you get all of this, red dead material that, is either standing or on the ground. I'll talk a bit about that. So we had in the early 2000s, the largest outbreak of mountain pine beetle that we've ever seen. And this occurred mostly, you can see it kind of extends down through the US. So it was in the intermountain areas. But British Columbia was kind of the real, kind of key place for this to happen. And I had a friend that worked up there, and he basically said, he described it as the extent of the damage was he flew for, 45 minutes in a small aircraft and saw nothing but red and dead trees. So it was just this, massive amount of material. It actually wound up, they thought it would be isolated there. There were storms that actually picked up these beetles, moved them across the Canadian Rockies. I don't know if you've been up to the Canadian Rockies. They didn't fly over, but they storm deposited beetles over into Alberta, then killed a bunch of trees over in Alberta too. But a lot of this was related to the stand conditions. They'd created basically this single cohort, these mature lodgepole pine stands, which is the favorite habitat of mountain pine beetle. And so once it got started, they just couldn't cut their way out of it fast enough. So they created these huge, buffer zones, and the beetles just moved across the buffer zones. And so, yeah, this was probably the largest, natural disturbance event they had ever seen. We had some of that in Oregon as well to a lesser degree in Washington. But at the same time, we also had spruce beetle that was acting. I covered some areas up in Alaska too. So huge outbreaks on the Kenai Peninsula. That's where I used to live for a while. And then areas of Southeast Alaska as well. And then to the south, we moved back into kind of this drier country. We had pinyon nips, and so another bark beetle that was kind of, and so all of these kind of collided at the same time, and just this massive disturbance event. We weren't able to, I mean, the drivers for these are different, so it wasn't like there was one driver that would, account for all of this damage, but it was kind of this perfect storm of conditions coming together for this to happen. So a little bit of a anatomy of what happens during these outbreaks. These are some photos I took during the one that happened in kind of peaked around 2008. And you can see kind of in the center of the picture, this was kind of where there's some fading trees here. This would be where things kind of started. And this is pretty heavy lodgepole pine, older cohort of trees. And then there's some other species mixed in here too. Some of the lighter colors you see, all the brick red is mostly lodgepole pine. And then you have some western white pine in here, some ponderosa pine that are the lighter color crowns. But really these kind of start as this small kind of spot population. And then just you can see it start to expand. And then at a certain point, you get this kind of sea of infested trees. In this case, all the red is the lodgepole pine. You can see there's kind of some grand fir, white fir mixed in there as well. And that's the remaining green trees. And then this kind of area here, this was kind of one of the tragedies of this outbreak, was these legacy ponderosa pines, a lot of like older, late successional reserve type ponderosa pine. Once they get they tend to be more resistant to mountain pine beetle, but whenever you get this sea of lodgepole pine infested, it moved into those stands and killed a lot of those trees as well. So we lost this kind of vast area of forest in that area. And this is kind of, if you know where Winter Rim is above, or Winter Ridge above Summer Lake, kind of that long plateau that was just pretty much solid lodgepole pine. All of that was, pretty much wiped out. And this occurred over the period of about 10 years. So it was like a significant period of time where this happened. But yeah, I remember thinking like, man, what's going to happen when fire gets in there? And does anyone remember which fire occurred down there in that area? The bootleg, right? And it was one that was sending, I don't know if you remember this one, but it was like sending smoke up into the jet stream that was then traveling and getting deposited in cities in the East Coast or in the Midwest. So like St. Paul and Minneapolis and Chicago and DC were all getting smoke from the bootleg fire. So there is this connection with this material, and I'll talk a bit more about that. So this is the quick version. I could talk about this all day, but you can have me back for a second lecture and I'll talk about just this. So. No one wants to hear any more, Flowers. But so my colleague and friend, Jeff Hickey, did this study back in 2012. It's basically a review and synthesis of all of this published literature, kind of trying to relate some of these bark beetle cause mortality events to what we see in, fire and fuels. And you would think there would be this logical connection. It's like you have all this down material, you have all these red dead trees. That's obviously going to contribute to fire behavior. But the story is a bit more complicated than that, in that they found that some aspects of this vegetation, like focusing in on this dead, dying vegetation, enhanced certain aspects of fire, whereas others, basically, there was no effect, or it actually diminished the impact, which was, that was kind of a hard one to tease out. But basically what we found is the time since the outbreak was a key factor. And really that's related to the status of the trees, the condition that the trees are in. And particularly past disturbances are a big one. One thing that we've been fortunate to have is we've had a lot of fires recently in Central Oregon. And so when new fires hit the footprints of the old fires, that tends to change the behavior. And so we've been lucky, especially along Cascade Lakes Highway and around Mount Bachelor, where there's been a lot of big fires that have kind of created these footprints that have prevented other fires from continuing to move across that landscape. But yeah, certainly this study also highlighted there's a lot of stuff that we don't know as well. But part of Jeff's work, it really was focused in on, I think you can see that on the top. So these phases, this is basically showing kind of the post bark beetle phases of decline. And so in kind of years 1 to 4, it's kind of this red phase where you see all of these red needles on the trees. Those gradually fall to the ground, and then you move into this kind of 5 to 10, post outbreak period. You tend to see a lot of standing dead trees without needles. And then the half-life of a lodgepole pine is about 10, 12 years that it actually stays standing. So all that material starts hitting the ground. Get those jackstraw stands. If you've ever done some surveys through those, that's a lot of fun. Where you're trying to run a transect through the middle of this jackstraw lodgepole pine. So as that material hits the ground, and then in the years, subsequent, you have this regen that's coming back through that. And so, as you would expect, based on these conditions, you kind of see this time since outbreak. You can see changes. And this is a rather complicated graph, but I'll try to break this down for you in a simple way. So this is kind of looking at three factors. And so basically the properties related to, and this is the time, again, sort of the time series since the outbreak, showing the kind of the red phase, the gray phase, and then this sort of older phase where you have the fall, snag fall, and regrowth and development. Looking at, so surface fire properties would be one kind of factor. So this is just fire running along the ground. Torching, which would be distinguished from this active crown fire. So torching is basically where fire's running along the ground and then it's torching up to hit certain trees or small areas, versus the active crown fires that's spreading crown to crown. And so basically what they found is that, and this was kind of the synthesis of this work, if we're looking at surface fire properties, you would expect there to be kind of this gradual increase as you go through. And that's kind of what we see. So as more materials hitting the ground, it's slowly increasing this amount of potential for surface fire. Torching potential kind of tracks that as well. So there's a little bit of an increase during this red needle phase, but for the most part, that kind of levels out. And then you have, again, this sort of slow increase that's connected to these surface fire properties. But the big one was the active crown fire potential. And this is kind of the key where it comes into like when the fire actually starts, the conditions under which it starts. So if it starts during this red needle phase, so those are highly flammable, and also because they're flammable and the trees are kind of connected to one another, then you get this huge increase right off the bat. So during that red needle phase, we see this, active crown fire potential goes way up. And then as those needles fall to the ground, you move into this gray phase, then it kind of drops down. And then it slowly, there's this kind of second phase as you move into more of the snag fall and the regrowth and development, then you see this kind of peak back up again. But this is kind of what we would expect in terms of, like overall fire behavior relative to these things. Does that kind of make sense?
Crowns are gone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, it's but actually, like there's a lot of other factors that come into play as well. So it's one of those things that I think the bark beetle piece of it is just one component, but really the conditions under which the fire occurs, the topography, the relative humidities, the winds, all these kind of things play a big role in whether these things take off. And the bootleg was kind of one of those things too, where we did have all of this dead down material from these previous outbreaks, but then we had all the rest of it too. So you had the wind and the hot, dry conditions and all of that.
Did the study look at kind of resistance to control as you go through that cycle as well? Because coming from the fire world I have, it's, you're facing all the snags and trying to cut line through all the jackstraw things. So I think there's not only is the fire intensity on the ground picks up, but also the resistance to control becomes much more difficult and expensive and on and create more smoke for the East Coast.
Yeah, it's true.
The east side, the dead material stays on the ground for so long.
Yeah, things don't really. It's true. Yeah. And in fact, some of the controlled burns that we do, we actually have to go in, pile burn all the material before you send fire through because of the long history of these stands, where they basically have got accumulated materials for, decades sometimes. But yeah, we're still doing some work with this. We haven't seen, there's not like kind of the smoking gun of like, if you have, dead and down big bark beetle outbreaks, you're automatically going to have these big fires in those areas. But certainly there is that connection with a lot of the dead and down material. And for the most part, with other species where we're outside of these lodgepole systems, we tend to have, there's more kind of spot effects. A lot of the other bark beetles don't run across the landscape kind of killing everything. They're more patchy in the way that they operate. So fortunately that helps in terms of, controlling fire and dealing with fire on the landscape. So. But anyway, that's the short version. So this is a question I get all the time. Well, what are you doing about it? It's like, that's always the kind of number one that comes up. I like that people have that confidence in me, that they think I can stop it. Whenever the outbreak ends, I immediately take credit for it though. I'm like, you're welcome, everybody. That's why I'm here. That's why I do what I do. That's why you have me. It's to end these things. But unfortunately, like I mentioned before, with the predators, the parasites, and these natural controls, they don't really control these bark beetle outbreaks. Weather also surprisingly doesn't. We did some like lab testing to figure out what temperatures you need to be able to kill a beetle. It's pretty low. It's like -30 for 5 to 6 straight days to be able to kill beetles. So weather doesn't really regulate it too much. So most of what you're doing out there, you can see in the West Bend Project and other places kind of around the city, using silviculture as our primary tool of reducing risk. So, reducing the densities of the stands, changing the species composition back to more of the kind of historic regime. We do have some tools in the toolbox that use these repellent pheromones. So it's basically a signal that kind of says, hey, that this tree is fully occupied and the beetles will kind of reorient somewhere else. But we usually use those in only high priority situations. For instance, mostly in the white bark pine, which is, it's one of those, it's the only tree species that's ever been given like an ESA, endangered species designation. And so we have those as you move up into, Mount Bachelor and a lot of the peaks around here. Up in Newberry Monument, there's a ton of white bark that we've been trying to preserve using these kind of pheromone tools. But for the most part, we're really relying on silviculture out there. And so I work a lot with our silviculturists to help plan treatments that will both reduce the risk of fire and reduce the risk of bark beetles, or at least maintaining them in sort of a manageable way. So shifting gears a bit, I did want to mention, as you remember from the map, we've had some pretty spectacular defoliator outbreaks as well. This insect up top here is the western spruce budworm, and then tussing moth as well is one that we've seen. This one with all the kind of hairs there. Those are also like 2 insects that we've had to some degree in Central Oregon, more in the Blue Mountains, kind of more in that mixed conifer forest that we typically see these. But for the most part, they are just feeding on the needles, kind of creating stress conditions, but those trees usually recover unless it's subsequent to drought, or if it's a really severe outbreak, sometimes you'll see bark beetles coming in at the end of those. But for the most part, these cycle up and down much faster. I mean, the span of outbreaks tend to be just over the period of a few years. And so they tend to be less damaging. But again, if there's this connection with defoliation and then, drought conditions, you can get bark beetles in there. So this is our friend, the Pandora moth. You've probably seen this one before. So they frequent Target and some of the big box stores, wherever has outdoor lights. The baseball stadium too. That was kind of a fun night of Pandora moth. They were on the foul ball nets, and every time a ball would hit the net, like they would just scatter into the crowd. So it was landing in people's beers and everything else. So that was kind of a fun night, to be there. I was just quietly like, I'm probably the only one here that knows this is going to be okay. But yeah, I have actually some tree ring analysis in my office that I meant to bring it along, but it shows over the 300-400 years of this ponderosa pine's life, they were able to tell when Pandora outbreaks occurred, and there were about 20 to 25 outbreaks that occurred over the span of that tree's life. We were able to kind of look at dendrochronology and be able to tell where they occurred based on the tree growth, the ring growth. So we know we have this long history here. Goes all the way back to the Native Americans actually used them as a food source. I have not eaten one yet. That's the question I always get. They're like, so how are they
prepared?
Yeah, how are they prepared? Well, they actually would dig these. So they would dig these rings around the trees because they are up feeding in the foliage and they come down. So they would kind of dig a pit, and then they would just kind of put fire in there and kind of like dry roast them and into like a bit of a jerky. So I understand. I know this from talking to my friends on the Warm Springs that described this. So you could have your kind of caterpillar jerky that you could then rehydrate throughout the winter. So I'm not tried it yet, but if anybody has, let me know what your experience has been. I'm not that big of a nerd yet. Yes.
The
Pandora moths, they don't eat the buds, so
Right.
a couple times where trees looked like they were dead, but they come back unless they're already stressed. But what's mysterious to me, maybe you can address, is like when they come around, they go through maybe about 3 cycles or something. But what is it that causes them to appear? And then what's the happening about them disappearing?
Yeah, I mean, with the defoliators, we do see these, as I mentioned, these kind of dramatic rises and falls, and we don't really know what initiates it. We think it's related to, there's some internal clock, not really cicada-like where it's on a regular rhythm, but there's sort of some internal population dynamics where it's like every 10 to 15 years, we tend to see one as you look back, but it's not a regular cycle. And then we think there's an environmental component too. Perhaps, there's something there, but we haven't really been able to identify what initiates these things, but we know what causes the declines. And so the latest outbreak was over the 7 to 8 year period. And that's pretty common where you go through these 3 to 4 generations. And so they're larvae 1 year, so they're chewing on the needles, and then next year they're adults kind of flying around. And so during the adult phase, of course, there's no feeding, so the trees kind of recover, and then they go back, and then there's kind of some more defoliation. But yeah, you're right. Typically, even though the trees kind of look like this condition, they look like they're kind of dead and dying, most of them come back. We haven't seen a lot of tree mortality related to those, but the sort of the way that these, let's see, did I put anything? Yeah, so this is the map kind of showing the last outbreak too. You can kind of see along the 97 corridor, kind of going south through La Pine down towards Klamath Falls. That was kind of our major area. So they're in these pumice soil areas for the most part, is the only place that we see them. And so we did a special survey to kind of document where the damage was. It overlaid the footprints of previous outbreaks, as you would kind of suspect. But it's really the natural enemies that help regulate them. So towards the end of the outbreak, basically, you have this small amount of natural enemies. So these are predators, parasites, and also diseases play a big role. And so as the population builds, so do the diseases, the parasites, and the predators. They all are kind of tracking the population growth. And at a certain point, they build up to high enough numbers that they're able to kind of bring things crashing down. But as we learned during COVID, when you have high populations of people, it's easy to spread diseases around, in certain areas. And so that's basically what happens. There's this group of viruses that are specific to these type of caterpillars that build up in the populations, and then they just come crashing down dramatically. The most kind of crazy example of this, I don't know if anyone remembers, in the Blue Mountains, there was a pine butterfly outbreak, like in 2016, 2017, like hundreds of thousands of acres just covered in these white butterflies. And we see them around every year, but we'd never really seen an outbreak like that before. They went from being, millions, hundreds of millions of insects to 0 in like 1 year, where just the diseases, the parasite predators kind of built up and brought those populations crashing down. And there literally was just like every, water surface in the Blue Mountains was covered in these white butterflies when this kind of population collapsed. But yeah, so really dramatic kind of ups and downs as we see. If you want to do a deeper dive on Pandora moth, I did a podcast interview where we kind of talked all about it and all of those things. So, but yeah, I guess the bad news is these outbreaks are likely to continue, but for the most part, it's something that is not going to greatly impact the trees in the way that we see with a lot of bark beetles. I also went to a Halloween party and someone was dressed up like a Pandora moth. So I was like, kudos to you, my friend. I think I'm probably the only person in the room that understands your costume. But yeah, so he had the feathery antenna, and then he also had, I don't know if you see the tennis balls, but they lay these kind of, bright green eggs. And so he's like carrying the tennis balls around with him all night. So respects, you win the costume contest for the night. All right, so moving into the kind of third and final category, I wanted to talk a bit about invasive species. And so this has become much more, when people are like, oh, what worries you? I was like, yeah, some of these native insects, the big outbreaks and how that's going to, relate to long-term disturbance and fire and changes in sort of our forest conditions. That's a big concern, but really it's the non-natives that I kind of lose sleep over. And this is a big one that has recently come to Oregon. So the reason that these are so much more damaging is there's really this lack of any natural enemy, associated with these. They kind of get introduced into a new environment, and the trees also have no resistance. There's no evolutionary history of kind of the trees being resistant to these things. So although we don't have a lot of ash in Central Oregon, there's some in the parks around here that I've been keeping an eye on. But for the most part, this is kind of a west side issue. But this one, anyone from the Midwest at all? Remember any of this? Kind of was ground zero, was back in Detroit area, kind of around there. And I had some family that lived there. And so it basically killed about every ash tree throughout large sections of the Midwest. And then via transportation, and it got there originally in solid wood packing material. So it was like transportation movement through that pathway. And then from there, it really got into, they had these huge areas they were just dumping all of this dead wood, and then people would come cut it for firewood and then carry it all over the place. And so that's the way that it made the jump from like the Midwest to Boulder, Colorado was like the next point where there was kind of this firewood transport pathway. And then it made the jump to Oregon. So we're the only place on the West Coast where we kind of have this thing now. But it's one of the few insects that's made the cover of Time magazine. And this was like 2014, 2015 when it was really kind of doing all of this damage. But as I mentioned, a lot of these things, one of the other species, which we found at the Port of Portland a few times, is the Asian longhorn beetle, which looks very similar to one of our common beetles. But for the most part, I mean, it's really this firewood pathway that we've been trying to address for the most part. It's the human activity piece of it that's really moving things around. So yeah, it's like, I'm amazed that people will travel from Michigan with their firewood, but it's a true story. I can't imagine. I'm like, we have firewood here too. So, but yeah, so it made the jump, and so now we're kind of in this situation down here on the left-hand side. So these are the infestations currently in the western part of Oregon. So around 4 counties now are kind of where those. It started. Forest Grove was kind of the initial point, and we've been doing. And I say it's really Department of Agriculture, Department of Forestry have been doing these surveys to try to find these things. They're hard to catch in traps. They're not quite as easy to catch as some other insects. And so we're really seeing them move fast. Everywhere they've tried to eradicate it to this point has failed. And so they're very good flyers. They tend to occupy almost every ash species in North America. They can kill very small, down to like 1-inch material, which is kind of unique. Aspect of their biology. So we're in this, what's called slow ash mortality. SLAM is kind of the acronym, but it's trying to slow the spread by doing surveys, identify new areas, cut those. But for the most part, we kind of expect that it may occupy the full range of ash on the west side, which is troubling in the sense that it is our major riparian species there. So throughout all of these areas, it's kind of the one species that can survive in these flood zones. And so we're doing some work to actually going in and trying to, continue the surveys. But again, it's very hard to kind of find these things. A couple other ones that I want to mention that I've been involved with too. So has anyone heard of, the old name was gypsy moth. It's since changed to spongy moth, but we've actually we've found them a number of times here in Central Oregon because they're related to the movement from people moving from the east, basically carrying these egg masses on cars, on campers, other types of things, bringing it to the West Coast, and we kind of find these all over. But there's one of my friends runs the Slow the Spread spongy moth effort in the east, which is like a $7 million program where they've been trying to basically curtail those populations. I remember as a kid, like growing up in North Carolina and Virginia, like all the national forests would just get, defoliated certain years with spongy moth. So that's a large scale Forest Service effort in the east. Here in the west, I've been on this team where we've been doing these. Basically, it's the flighted spongy moth, or the 3 Asian varieties of this. And so we've been focused on both inspections in ports, and this is both where things are being shipped to North America, as well as once they get here, helping the inspectors kind of find these things. And mostly they're looking for these egg masses on the ship that then turn into caterpillars that make it out into the
Why'd the name
forest.
change?
So there was, I think it wasn't politically correct. There was a group
okay.
that from the Roma region, I think is where it was, where this was kind of a insult, about the name. So it shifted into spongy moth territory. That was not my vote. I thought there were a lot better names available, but I was not asked to be on the selection committee. But yeah, we do. So we do have this. We have this inward ash borer plan for Oregon's being implemented. Again, this kind of, this is the full extent of where things are occurring, basically, or where ash occurs, and where the risk is high. So yeah, we continue to kind of expect this to kind of make its way across the landscape, unfortunately.
Does it have any sort of predicted timeline?
They can fly about 6 miles is what we've found. So we expect it to, I think the timeline has been, I think the first detection was in about, what was it, like 2012, I want to say, 2014 maybe. So yeah, over the course of about 10 years now, it's spread out to these 4 counties. So we're hoping that, that will continue, but it's just kind of a matter of time, I think, before it makes it across the full range of ash in Oregon, which, it's hard to tell how long that will take. But if based on other states, in the Midwest, over the period of a couple decades, probably is what we're going to see it. And it's getting into a lot of wildlife refuges too, in some of these other places. So, I think the damage kind of, remains to be seen, but there are some other species there that can kind of fill the ecological role of ash, is kind of the hope. But it doesn't really provide those, shading for stream temperatures and some of those other things that we need. So we've actually done some work to go in and look to see, and we have these monitoring plots to see what's coming back sort of after the ash goes, and trying to see, how that's affecting, stream temperatures, shading, and these other types of things too. So
does it affect all species of ash?
Yes, all North American species. There is some resistance in Chinese ash, some of the Chinese ash species. So there is some work with doing resistance work here. We have a Darina Genetic Resource Center down in Cottage Grove, and so we're working there. We've collected seed across the full range of ash. So we have a genetic complement there that potentially kind of saving that in kind of a Jurassic type storage, situation. So you can bring these things back at some point. But again, all that material is going to be vulnerable to this insect. And so we're also looking to see what some of the properties of the resistant varieties are, and see if there's a way to kind of do, some genetic resistance. But that plays out over such a long period of time. It's really difficult to predict, how that's going to go. But we are kind of starting down that road at this point, because we see any species kind of eliminated from, North America in this way. So I also want to give a shout out to our Don't Move Firewood friends. So you've probably seen these, you've seen these like both, publications out there, billboards and other things, but really try to focus on, making sure that you're not moving these things around, and even moving from like Western Oregon to Eastern Oregon, even outside of like eco regions. We're like, just keep the wood within the eco region, because you can pack these pests along fairly simply. One of the few things that we're still doing kind of some aerial spray treatments for are these spongy moth infestations. So you can see kind of one of the egg masses. You also see those green traps all around town, kind of trap along all the corridors. We've seen it here. We haven't done any. We've done one spray project here, actually, in a place where we had reproducing populations. But yeah, so we're still doing these type of treatments to keep this insect from being established here on the West Coast. And I've gotten to do some international work with this too that I wanted to mention. So we worked with Russia before the war, as well as worked with Japan and Korea, kind of in these native regions, and really working with the folks there. So when they have these outbreaks that look like this, then they get onto the ships and all the vessels that are moving to North America. And so they basically have to pressure wash, all of these giant cargo ships and containers, and then do follow-up inspections. And so this is kind of a big collaborative effort. I'm the Forest Service person on the crew, but working with our colleagues at APHIS and Customs and Border Patrol, the countries themselves, it's been kind of a fascinating part of my career to be able to do some of this. So we did do some work in Vladivostok. This is kind of far eastern Russia, where a lot of steel was coming in to the port of Portland and into the Puget Sound from there. Again, this was many years ago, 2016, I think. But yeah, helping them do the inspections before these arrive in the new ports. I worked in Korea as well. Huge amount of material coming from Korea, especially car shipments coming into U.S. ports, particularly again, kind of on the West Coast. So again, working with our colleagues there to be able to do these inspections to try to find these things. As you can see, there's rust all over the ship that kind of looks like these things. So like training the inspectors and being able to recognize these things as well as potential other pests has been a big part of this. And I'm not really a regulatory person, so they kind of, bring the regulatory people up as the subject matter experts. So I get to kind of, go on boat cruises and things like that. So yeah, this was taking the team out. So yeah, it's been cool to have this collaboration, kind of across these different countries. Japan also has been super interesting to work in. A lot of things moving through, Japan into North American ports. There's our team. And one of the cool experiences here that I had was they have these capsule hotels there. And so, we're kind of in these port areas and all of that, but then we also have to kind of travel out to these remote areas. There's not always a lot of places to stay. So they had these capsule hotels. So I got to experience like beehive life in person. So this was kind of a personal highlight of all of this work in invasive species. So yeah, it's actually not as bad as you think it would be. So that was super fun. All right. Well, lastly, I just wanted to say, for more information, or if you have, detections, we have this invasive species hotline. So we've had, hundreds of calls coming in to those. Actually, experts like me get those messages and we review them. We actually had a record last year. We had 9 new detections of new things to Oregon that we had not found before, kind of across insects, diseases, vertebrates, and other things that we found from the invasive hotline. A lot of the help with the diagnostics for those, with Oregon State and with ODF and others. So yeah, I would certainly, if you do wind up with one of these things where you're not sure what's going on there, that's a great place to start. And then just a shout out to our Discover Your Forest too. So we sign up a lot of volunteers this way that help us with these citizen science projects monitoring. I've had lots of people come out with me and just help me collect data and do field work and those kinds of things. So really appreciate their work in Central Oregon. So with that, I think it's probably more than enough, more than you wanted to know. But yeah, I guess if there's time, I can take questions. But yeah, just appreciate the opportunity to be here and to share a little bit of what goes on in our world. And hopefully that, is a little bit of a primer. You might know a bit more about what you're seeing out there. So appreciate it. Yes.
Yeah, I remember the late 80s when mountain pine beetle came through and just thousands and thousands of acres turned orange and then died. But the interesting part was my family already had some small acreage in South Deschutes County on Fall River. And I remember helping my dad thin out the overgrown stands of lodgepole in particular. And when those beetles came through so heavy, they just killed, because we're right on the National Forest border, they just killed thousands of trees in the National Forest. And then they flew right through our property and we didn't lose one tree. And then our neighbors lost dozens of trees because, they hadn't done that work. So it is effective too. I guess they can sense the stress in the stands or something.
Yeah, the thinning piece is a big one because it's like the resources the trees can allocate. If they're in healthier condition, they can allocate more to defense. Like their main way of defending against the beetles is producing resin. And so when the beetles attack, they pitch them out. So they actually push them out. But if trees are under stress growing in like high density stands or just, and if there's other issues compromising them, they can't really produce.
They didn't even try to hit the trees in the areas that have been thinned out. Then kind of like related to that though is, you want to mitigate for fire and for things like that. But when you create the slash poles, there's a question here. How do you do it in a way that doesn't encourage IPS,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a good
because
question.
there's been some outbreaks recently that just come from slash piles, and then it kills the top of the trees nearby.
Yeah, they got into some problems with that down on the Gilchrist State Forest because they were cutting a lot of lodgepole pine, just decking them along the road, letting them dry out, and they were trying to use them for biomass and kind of coming in and pulling them out later. But yeah, when you're leaving a lot of material on the ground, you get the Ips beetles, these engraver beetles like to go into those piles and kind of build up populations and spill out. So what we usually say is it's the timing of slash creation, which is key. So the peak of the flight period, so when those beetles are out and looking for materials, is in the spring. And so basically our advice, and this gets hard because there's a narrow window to operate with, if you're trying to do these kinds of operations. But if you can push that beyond into summer, so summer and fall treatments where you're putting things on the ground in summer and fall is typically outside of the peak flight period of those beetles. So you can kind of avoid them that way. Or if you're covering the piles, or there's kind of some other operations, kind of depends on what the scale of it is. But yeah, we have a whole publication on kind of ways to mitigate slash in a way that will prevent these kinds of outbreaks from occurring. But timing is really key. So with BLM, some of the state folks that I've worked with, we've just kind of pushed those operations later into late June, July is kind of getting out of that period. But then you get into the period where it's tough to operate because of the time of year it is. So, but yeah, typically if things go on the ground at that phase, they will dry out enough by the next season. They're also not going to be not going to have those populations.
And then in the winter, then when they overwinter, then they're not going to be flying the next spring.
Right. Usually once those materials dry out, it becomes like uninhabitable. So yeah, it's really if you can get kind of a season, or we also recommend, like lop and scatter approaches where you're just scattering things out to dry out. If you're piling things, we recommend either really big piles or really small piles. It's kind of medium-sized piles where you get into some trouble. Because things don't, like in the very big piles, they kind of move deeper within the pile, whereas in the small piles, everything dries out. It's in the middle where there's like enough material where they reach a point where they run out, and then they're going to looking for standing trees. And so, but yeah, I can provide more info.
I brought it up because I don't think that there's very much awareness about that, and then people wonder, why are my trees dying?
Yeah, especially we've had those issues in areas where you have a lot of lodgepole pine and where people are kind of cutting those all the time and stacking that wood right next to their house and those kinds of things. So definitely seen some of that. You got a question?
So what you're saying also is the fact that we got to watch out for this year and the next years because climate does have an effect of it, and the drought that we've had, and also the high temperatures, right?
Yeah, so this concept of like hot drought versus just drought is kind of a new one that we've been working on. I did some work with Jeff, who I mentioned has done the work with fire, and we basically had this massive die-off of grand fir and white fir over the last few years. So especially in the Blue Mountains, there was some on the Ochco. We didn't see it as much. There was some on the Fremont Wainema as well, and some on the Deschutes, but for the most part, it was kind of Blue Mountains area. But yeah, I think it was close to 1 million acres that we mapped of this kind of scattered, dead and dying. Mostly it's grand fir in that area. But we think that's related to some drought that we had and looking at the factors related to it. But the interesting thing was we had previous droughts that were very similar to the one that we went through, but without the high temperatures. And so it really seemed like this time around, it was these sort of maximum sustained temperatures. And I don't know if you remember the heat dome that we had too, where there was this like massive, 2 or 3 days of extremely high temperatures. And I think that happened in like late May or June or something. And I think that pushed some trees over the edge as well. And we also had scorch like over these vast areas, both in Western Oregon and Central Oregon as well. But yeah, these type of heating events are definitely kind of, something we've only been recently paying attention to, but they seem to be driving some of these declines. And especially where that grand fir and white fir is growing, it's in these environments which typically would have been pine systems. So pine larch systems are now encroached with all of this kind of material based from fire exclusion. And so in one sense, everyone was like, oh no, all the trees are dying. But also I was like, well, this is kind of a reset, back to more of these drier pine systems that are really what is going to be most resilient long term. So,
Thinking about the work this group does, I'm reminded of all these kind of fairly uniform lodgepole stands in southern Deschutes County and the ecology of lodgepole pine it rarely ever reaches a climax stage. It either burns or it gets killed by insects, and then it comes back with this very heavy reforestation or regeneration that sets up the next cycle. So as we're trying to minimize human damage from fires in that kind of ecosystem, it's a kind of a stand replacement type of disturbance ecosystem that we're trying to inhabit. So I guess active management is the key.
Yeah, easier said than done. I'll say this. We, with the Deschutes Forest Collaborative, I don't know if you're familiar with that group, but I think some of you may sit on that one as well. But so we did a deep dive on lodgepole pine with them management for about a year. I think we talked about this, and we developed a lot of guidelines around that, as far as what we wanted to do. Unfortunately, the last piece of it that kind of came in was the economics. So it was like, we figured out exactly what you need to do, silviculturally, how the best way to manage the lodgepole in the different contexts that it grows in, because it grows in 4 or 5 different types of ecosystems. But your most resilient is this, multi-age stand where you have like this older, middle, and younger cohort where you're only losing this maybe older cohort to the beetles, but then you have this regen coming along that's going to be more resistant to it. However, trying to implement that at scale is really difficult just based on the economics of it. So yeah, but the idea is, with this single cohorts is punching holes in there. So basically creating this age structure dynamic. And the Canadians have been doing this where they had that massive outbreak. They've gone back in and tried to create this difference in age structure across that landscape so that, as this thing cycles again in 60 or 80 years, that, they won't see that. Right now, we're having a lot of issues up at Newberry. We have a building mountain pine beetle outbreak up there. And unfortunately, a lot of those trees were from the 80s outbreaks. They all came back as like a single cohort when it moved through there last time. And so now we're trying to go in and diversify the age structure in those stands as well. But yeah, it's going to be expensive to say the least. So yeah, we definitely know what we should be doing. It's just a matter of trying to do it at scale. It's really difficult.
Are you working with the Firewise program to get this word out?
Yes, we have some folks in our office that connect with them and try to get all of the basically best management practices kind of out there for dealing with that. Unfortunately, with some of the fires, even when you do everything right, you just have these environmental conditions, the wind and the heat and all those kinds of things that kind of overcome that, so it's, but that's not to say you shouldn't still do, the defensible space and all those kinds of.
Well, it seems like the thinning aspect would be be a great promotion for Firewise.
Yeah, and they're connected. So Christine Buell, who had our bee injury, she actually is the state forest entomologist, and the Forest Service passes through a lot of money to the state every year that supports thinning operations. So it's unfortunately a 50-50 cost share, which makes it hard for a lot of people to be able to do that work. But they can come alongside private landowners and provide basically monies to help get the thinning operations done. So yeah, we try to get that program advertised as well. Be able to kind of help out where those things occur. But yeah, we worked with Sun River. I saw Patty on here and some other folks that, with some of the homeowner associations to kind of get the word out through those as well. So they have a very active mountain pine beetle detection program down there. So yeah, they detect all the new spots and go in and treat those very quickly. So that's kind of another way to get after it too, is trying to, prevent these things from building. But when you're surrounded by national forest, that can be kind of a trick.
We had Christine Bull in 2023. She came and talked to us, so figured it was time to get another entomologist in here.
Yeah. It's like, it took that long for people to warm up to the idea. And so, yeah.
All right. Are there any other questions for Robbie? Anyone online? You can either speak up or put it in the chat.
Yeah, and my contact is there if you have follow-up questions, anything else I can help with, please let me know. Appreciate the chance to share today.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Find
Yeah,
this
thanks, bud.
fascinating.
Thank you.
Right. So we'll go ahead and move into roundtable. We got about 17, 18 minutes for roundtable. Andy Meeson says, awesome presentation. Thanks, Robbie, again. I'll go ahead and start with Tony.
Great. I was going to ask to go first. I got to leave in a few
Yeah,
moments.
perfect.
That burn pile, I sent you photos of that. There's a burn pile at River Meadows. They're just trying to get authority to combust it. So if anybody in the room can help with that, I think they found out they need to go ask Pretty Please to the DEQ. DEQ's think, I don't know exactly what, but this is what I think's going on. DEQ's like, well, we need to study this situation. We're not sure if we want to have smoke in the air. We're not sure if we're going to give you a permit. So everybody stand by. And we just need to burn this pile. And then the other idea is, well, put it in an air curtain burner, put it in dumpsters, but it's the size of 2 of these rooms. So, I mean, and it's in a gravel spot next to the lagoon at their sewer pivot. So if somebody can help, let's just go burn that pile. And I think the fire, River Meadows, I sent photos to Lauren and I think the fire chief. I mean, let's do it safely in the right conditions, but that may be today or tomorrow, come looking at the weather. So yeah, I mean, please help with that. And I'm asking you guys, to help with that. Also, we had our defensible space code discussion. I know, Monty, you're into this. Let's go, right? But it's interesting. It's a code package that's handed to us. We had it in our agenda last week. So here's the code package, a couple things. All reasonable. This is good stuff. But who's the responsible party with the clipboard that does the inspections and follows up, and who pays for that? That's going to be the tricky part. Even if we want to do this, how do we do this? And in California, there's $100 per property statewide that empowers CAL FIRE to do this. Maybe there's a transition plan. It's for all jurisdictions, cities and counties around the state of Oregon. And it's not ready yet. It's, we laid it on the table, and this is the agenda packet. We're going to bring it up again, but there's some discussions to be had there. It's an idea, let's go do something. I want my neighbor to clean up because I already cleaned up my property. I understand. Everybody agrees. But yeah, how do we implement this? It's going to be a little tricky. So we'll be open and ready for all that input. Go ahead.
Yeah, Tony, we went through this years ago at Senate Bill 350, and what we developed was a self-inspection program. And that might be something that the county commissioners really look at, where one person could send out cards, allow people to self-inspect their property.
The postcards where you check the boxes.
Exactly. And for those that didn't send it back in, you just give them a call and say, hey, would you like a representative from the local fire department? Maybe do that for 3 years or so and get people warmed up to this rather than just being government coming in and inspecting. So we found it worked. It was a good working program. And ODF decided, of course, after 10, 15 years to let it go.
Well, the history and the partnerships and the professionalism in this group, Project Wildfire from the 90s, this could be the center of the state where we say, oh, well, this is how you do it. I mean, because nobody's leading on this yet. So this can happen right here. But as I say, it just boils down to fine, somebody's going to have a clipboard, but who pays? Let's send postcards to everybody. Okay, well, where's that money coming from? I mean, it's just like a bootstrap situation. And as I say, I think we all want to do it. I want to be resilient to wildfire too. So this is going to be an interesting
What's the economic loss, though, if you don't do it? If a fire comes in, what's the economic loss?
There's 2 sides of the equation. I understand that, but public budgets are getting very stressed right now. I mean, so that's why I'm sitting here as a sitting commissioner, knowing that we're working as hard as we can to make sure that income and expense line doesn't cross. So, we need to do a little more. We need to do a little more. Okay, well, we just went bankrupt. So I'm just letting you know, it's like that right now.
I'm glad that we're having a conversation about this because R327 was, in my mind, a much easier lift because we have the capacity, the personnel in place already because of the permitting process and certificate of occupancy that's required, before you move into a new home and so forth. So, and with respect to fire-wise, we are always telling people to start with the house, harden the home first. So we've addressed builds, We have a huge problem with existing builds. We have a huge problem with connective fencing. And I'm just wondering, it's like, is this the right time for defensible space? Because there's so many questions about it, and the state kind of left us hanging in a way because they didn't throw any money to fund this. Would we have, and I know that, you know, in my community, if we had gone, you know, full bore with, hey, we're going to have a compliance policy and 0 to 5's got to be completely clear, and just, it just would have blown up. But with education, we're getting all of these folks on board. I'm just wondering if, you know, we didn't have much pushback. In fact, COBA supported R327 adoption and so forth. I'm just wondering if we would have greater success in a way if we kind of turned around and like, okay, while we're trying to figure out defensible space, it's like, is there an opportunity to nibble at the low-hanging fruit again, which would be maybe like, I don't know, connective fence or, you know, existing homes in some ways. And I'm looking at all of you guys in the coalition, and we're trying to wrestle with this, or will be, I think, over the next couple months to try and provide some input.
This is it. This group right here, Wildfire Neighborhood Coalition, could be an effective mouthpiece or distributor of, instead of mailing. We have 101 neighborhoods apparently that are active that could actually be the distributors and the frontage to a program like this.
And as I say, there's so much motivation. Let's go do that. But it's always going to be that last 10 or 20, 15, 20%. People like, just leave me alone. Don't you tell me what to do. Yeah. Well, no. We're the government. We've decided. And the majority said you have to do this. So, I mean, it's just, there's a moment out there that we need to work through. But we all want to do that together. Because it's probably
absentee owners are big. They're in our area. That's a big issue.
Some number, 80-20, whatever. I mean, so many people will be, this is the greatest thing. But it's just that last 20% or whatever, they're going to be, we didn't get that one yet. So we'll talk about that in the next few months around here. And I do apologize, I got to go. So that worked out wonderful for me. Thank you very much for the presentation.
So if you haven't heard yet, I'm going to be leaving my position. So this is actually my last Project Wildfire meeting. The COWWP is kind of going through some realignment due to OCC was only funded for 1 year out of 2, and that's kind of been the backbone of this program that propped it up. And so part of Oregon Corps, our partner, and COIC working through a funding gap that's going to occur between the new OCC funding source, that the tax revenue is going to be associated with the transient lodging tax starting in 2027. So the disbursement of those funds might not occur until like fall of 2027. And so there's a pretty significant gap there. So all that's to say that the outlook right now is that COWWP is going to be still existing, but not super active or capable to take on projects. And so they're likely not going to be rehiring my position. COIC's Youth Corps will still be looking for projects actively. And so Melissa and I have kind of chatted informally about how to work with COIC's program staff and sort of replace my role of going out and checking on properties. And so also opening that up to other folks who are already doing home hazard assessments. Please touch base with Melissa or myself before I get out of here on Friday is my last day, but I'm putting together like a transition document for who's the contact for if you have a project that seems like it's a good fit for COIC's crews to come out and take care of, then we can connect those dots. We currently have a queue that's pretty substantial for the spring, but we also try to operate on a rolling basis to where if someone came in to apply for the program that was an obvious candidate that's super high social vulnerability, we want to jump those people to the top of the pool. So there will still be program staff in place to sort of review applications and say, yes, we're going to prioritize this project. But right now things are going to be pretty slow for the spring. So that's kind of my update. Melissa is a great point of contact for that for now. And also COIC's existing CED staff. So Shelby Knight and Sean Keithley. So it's been a pleasure working with you all. So this is my last Project Wildfire meeting. So
You don't have to not come.
You can still join online.
Yeah, I might still be a
Pop
little
in
bit
sometime.
involved. So I'm moving on to go get my master's, focusing in prescribed fire application and like doing forest activity to prepare for fire use. So like silviculture stuff. And so I'll still be moving around the state and working with extension agents and prescribed burn cooperatives and stuff. So you'll probably see me again.
The Red Cross is gearing up for fire season. One thing we're doing throughout our kind of Oregon, Southwest Washington region is doing some shelter simulation exercises, which are unannounced to our volunteers. Again, Red Cross is primarily a volunteer-driven organization. So we're doing some exercises where kind of out of the blue, our local disaster program managers are contacted and say, hey, you need to set up 2 shelters in 2 different locations that can house 50 people tonight. And even though there's no actual fire going on, we'll actually physically call volunteers, we'll activate our shelter trailers and transport them to some location where there's going to be a shelter, and they actually have to physically open up the trailer and start setting up the shelter. So those are all exercises to get us in the mindset for this summer. Again, since we're a volunteer-driven organization, it's always at the mercy of, are there any volunteers around today, or are they all doing something else? So it's a good exercise for us to assess our readiness, and we'll be evaluating how those simulations go.
Awesome, thank you.
Alberta Shoots River Communities, we're a volunteer outfit as well. And we have 2 different defensible space programs. And thanks to the county and other good people, we got some decent funding for this year. And we opened up for applications for our incentive defensible space program, where we reimburse the first few $100s, but people end up spending about 3 times as much. So it's working as an incentive. But we had to close the program in 24 hours because there's so much more awareness now, and there's a lot of demand. So I look at that as a good thing, indicating that people are really motivated to do something on a scale that I haven't seen before. So that's my report from UTRC.
Okay, only thing I got to report, we got 3 dumpsters out. And with the money we had from prior grant, we were able to get them out 2 weeks before the May 1st. So we've got them out as of last Friday. So, and they were full by Saturday. So good. Okay, thanks.
I don't have anything.
The wildfire preparedness fairs at La Pine, we had probably between somewhere 75 to 100 people. It was very well attended. The one at Sun River was even more well attended. And they had was it IBHS speaker who did a fantastic job. And there was 100 to 125 people at least there. So the word's getting out. We're going to be doing a demonstration project. We meaning Newberry Regional Partnership and the Defensible Space Action Team. That's going to be on May 30th. We are close to finding a property to do this on. And so we're gearing up for that. So we got a lot of things going.
Thank you.
This red one.
Yes.
Let's see, our next preparedness fair is May 9th for Bend at COCC, and that is from 10 to 1. That is exciting because COCC is the first college that is recognized as being firewise in the state of Oregon. So they will be, Paula Simone will be doing a short presentation on what that means and introducing the new Firewise Club that's at COCC. We're also going to have a Project Wildfire Neighborhood Coalition panel. Several of the committee members are going to be sitting at a table, and then it will be rapid fire questions from the community. They don't know what is going to be asked, and it's just going to be a fun idea to engage with homeowners. And then I'll be giving a short presentation about Own Your Zone in our program. Please, everybody that comes, bring your go bag, your assembled go kit, because you'll get a free ice cream coupon from Handles. So obviously the idea there is to inspire action and change, right? So if you have your go bag ready by May, then it's ready by August. So that's what we're hoping for. The other thing, we're just a little busy at this time. The big defensible space topic, the code, that's a big thing. My job is to figure out how we can realistically approach this situation by either a phased-in approach, a volunteer, or volunteer basis. We do that with construction, with commercial fire inspections as well. So we can ask a business to go ahead and do their own fire inspection and send it in to us. So it does work. We are looking at those options. Defensible space is not new. Other states do this. It's not a new concept, but it is a big push for Bend and Deschutes County. So just everybody has such great input, and I cannot do this without anybody. So thank you so much. The things we're considering are, does it apply to residential or, existing or new residential construction only, right? That's a big topic. We know existing communities are more flammable. People acquire treasures over their lifetime in their yard. And so things are just more flammable. So there's a lot. I don't want to introduce a code to the city of Bend specifically that isn't enforceable. We will be set back 10 to 15 years if we try that. So education, my goals are to educate Bend Lapine School District. I want to start there because there's a lot of parents there that are not part of Project Wildfire because they have busy lives. We need to get them educated. I want to educate and partner with Lowe's and Home Depots and start talking about fire-resistant plants and having a section there. I want to start talking to landscapers on a larger basis than what we do now is 3 or 4 workshops a year. So I had someone call me the other day and tell me their landscaper told them that they live in the middle of Bend. They are not at risk for wildfire, so they can put bark mulch in the first 5 feet of their home. You know what that did to me. So I got their name and number, and I'll be calling them this morning. So it's a big push. So all that to say, your efforts are not going unnoticed, but it's going to be a slow process, and we're going to do some really good work. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Back to, I think it was the fire chief or fire authority, the Marine Fire Authority talk we had here that talked about just 80% of the homes having defensible space is like the best you can. It provides the best collective defense to a community. So even if you're not getting every home in the community, you're not adding that much more, and their place will burn up, and the rest of the community will be all right. So I mean, be really proud of 80% done communities, and I think that's where the volunteer self-certification can get you there, as we saw in 360 in a lot of places. We're starting off, I think the sheriff's office is going to be doing some PSAs through May for Wildfire Awareness Month. We're going to be pushing out the high-low evacuation siren videos. Hopefully you all share those, so that's all the police vehicles, not just the Deschutes County sheriffs, but all the state. I think the state, maybe not, the cities at least, have high-low sirens for going through neighborhoods and alerting folks. So a lot of the evacuation awareness, signing up for Deschutes alerts, and Genesis Protect app, as well as if you haven't already, hopefully you're helping folks sign up for the CO fire alerts so you get notified of prescribed burns in the areas, and there may be some general fire information also put out that way. I think it's May 13th or 14th. Then there'll also be a test alert that goes out. Deschutes alerts will be sent out countywide. Just last month we did an access and functional need test alert. It's very successful. I think there's 27 little over 2,700 folks that have indicated that they may have additional needs for evacuations. And so, and then with our health services folks, actually, if people didn't go in and check their accounts or respond in some way, we actually reached out and called everybody on that list and just kind of check on their status and help them update information if we need to. Proud to say we're leading the state in those efforts, trying to outreach to the folks that may have additional needs. So, and it's not just for wildfires either. I think that's been my big message this spring. That signing up for Deschutes alerts, it's not just wildfire; it's all risk type of alerts that you're going to get sent out. Pulse Point doesn't cover all the alerts. Watch Duty doesn't. You won't get alerts about a flood and sisters on watch duty that we might be pushing evacuation information out about. So it's really important that everybody sign up for that. So.
Can I ask you a quick question, just clarification? So in the past, the Deschutes alerts have always happened about May 6th during the first week. It's May 13th this year? Okay. It's previously, I think I'd seen May 6th, so.
Right, we're at 9:30, so we're gonna go quickly through the rest. Did you have anything for roundtable?
I just want to say one thing. We're a new Firewise community. We're having our first community meeting tomorrow night. 82 houses. We're hoping to have a big turnout. And as busy as Melissa is, she's going to be there to give a presentation to our community. So thank you, Melissa.
You guys have been, and you became Firewise so quicker than almost any other. I mean, as far as the process goes, they had a presentation, they had me come out, we did the walkthrough, they got their certification. I mean, it was amazing. So, yeah.
What community is that?
Westside Meadows?
What community?
It's Westbrook Meadows, off the highway going up to Mount Bachelor in front of Sunrise Village. It's a community just below that. As you can imagine, lots of trees and other forest elements. So we're quite concerned. And Melissa's been a fantastic help and resource for us.
I'll just say, to follow on Commissioner DeBone's comments from earlier, if anyone wants to watch that discussion with the Oregon State Fire Marshal staff, you can do that at the Deschutes County meeting portals page. All those meetings are recorded. It's about a 2-hour discussion, so settle in and learn some more.
Robin Church. So for Three Pines HOA, we ran a program thanks to Melissa and Heather. They came in, our community is 4 years into Firewise education and activity and so forth. So it was the right time to do an assessment of our community as firefighters would see it during a fire event. And so we actually had Melissa and Heather come through and do a structural triage on our homes. So it was also a way for us to measure success because when we started, probably 90 to 95% of our homes were check and go or prep and go type homes. And we've moved that needle to now over 40% are standalone ready or prep and hold. So we've made a lot of progress, and there's a lot of enthusiasm in our neighborhood. But those that we had 25% or 22% of our homeowners attend the program, and then I'll be following up individually with those that weren't in attendance. But everyone received a personalized home report outlining the steps that they can take on their individual properties, what they can do to move. And so we're encouraging everyone to strive to the next highest level. And if everybody does that, then we'll actually be, I think we'll almost be at that. We'll be, if everybody strove to the next highest level, would be, even those that didn't attend, we would be at 83% standalone and prep and hold condition. So we've since in 2022, when we started, a lot of activity. Best attended program was our garden tour program, where we had one example house that was great condition and then two that were just getting started and they were check and go. 2024, we had a arborist come in and teach people how to manage their landscapes. And we talked about, and since he was a wildland firefighter, he could talk about the structural triage. So now we're introducing it yet again. And it's everyone wanted to know. We gave people the option if you wanted to know the triage category of your particular house, happy to give it to you. The HOA doesn't know, insurers don't know. Anyway, we provided that to them, and 100% of the people who attended wanted to know. So people are pretty enthusiastic to get the work done. So we'll see what happens. We can measure the program and see how effective it is. So it's Robin.
No additional reports.
Okay, so one thing, there was a question if Smokey will be at COCC for the fair.
Say that again.
Will Smokey be at COCC?
I confirmed that Smokey should be there.
Okay, cool, thank you.
That was the highest level of confirmation.
Okay.
Should be there.
And then
But Buster the fire dog will be there.
okay, Buster will be.
Really Bigfoot.
Okay.
Getting all them together.
Okay, and Robert Newey says, excellent presentation, Robbie. Report out for Forest Service Kaufmas. Currently in the midst of prescribed fire season, go to centraloregonfire.org or text COFIRE to 888-777 for more information related to planning RX fire operations and air quality maps. Wildfire, U.S. Forest Service, U.S. What was WF? I don't remember. So fire resources are onboarding, conducting pre-season training, gearing up for the season. Just wrapped up National Repels recertification in the West Bend area. And then, so that was it for online. Thanks, Robert. One thing, just real quick that I was going to add. Ben, you are presenting next month for us, aren't you? In May?
Surprise.
Yes.
Okay, so that's, I know we talked about it a couple months ago.
Yes.
Yeah, so Ben's gave him some time to get comfortable in his new role, and I'm going to have him present for us. We usually try to do once a year evacuation presentation at Project Wildfire, so be here in May for that. And then we have the annual barbecue in June. We're gonna need to do some brainstorming. I believe we're gonna meet with the steering committee. We aren't gonna be able to do the full fancy barbecue catered this year just due to budgeting. So we're gonna do some brainstorming on ways to keep the cost down from that. Just so potluck. Yeah, there's a few things I've been thinking, and also looking at just kind of like some smaller catering companies that aren't quite as expensive. Doing a barbecue potluck. Got to see what we are allowed to bring to the Sun River Shark Center as well. So that's all I got. There will be a survey I'll send out probably next month for RSVPs. You know how hard I hammer that. Paul always gives me a hard time. He's like, oh, again. But yeah, it's because people will RSVP and not show up, or they will not RSVP and show up. I need to have numbers to feed everybody. So anyway, that's all I got.
Sacrificed and taken lots home.
Yeah.
I've had
Yeah.
to sacrifice and take buckets of food home. So I'm just saying, I can't do that again this year.
That's all I got. Thanks again, everyone. Thank you again, Robbie. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Was that? Yeah.
Need a refresher over